Test.
No.
I was teasing someone. I said, I'm really hit him hard. And I said, what should I do? And I said, I should say, can you get somebody? Yes. That's right. Is it plugged in?
Is it look like it's on? Does it look like it's on or no?
I've been invited many times. I've never been able.
Can you go back and see if the board, see if it's even lit up? Because it's not lit up. It's in the back corner, yeah, by that door.
One of the most enthusiastic kids from every Jesuit high school and college with them all together. And the solutions are great. This guy. What happens tomorrow?
I don't think I have anything.
Tomorrow, I think you're book signing tomorrow.
Oh, do you really?
Yeah.
You didn't tell me that I had anything, but I think I might have it tonight.
Maybe you're tonight. Okay. Oh yeah, liturgy's fine. All right. Good evening, everyone. If we can have your attention, please. We'd like to begin. We have a great group here. So.
Greg.
My name is Chris Kerr. I'm the Executive Director of the Ignatian Solidarity Network, and on behalf of ISN, I'm so excited to welcome you to this special event that we're able to put on specifically for young alumni and former Jesuit volunteers. I want to really quickly recognize our sponsors for this event. You can see their logos up here, and they're over here on the left-hand side. Contemplative Leaders in Action, JVC Northwest, Holy Trinity Parish here in D.C., America Media, JVC, Boston College School of Theology and Ministry, Equal Exchange, and the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life at Georgetown University. We're really grateful for their support. I also, if I can have your attention, please. If the folks in the back, I know you're still getting drinks, but if I could have your attention, please. Thank you. I also want to thank, you'll notice that tonight, it's not easy to have an event like this here in Washington. It takes a lot to put together. Really grateful to a family who is a longtime supporter of the Ignatian Solidarity Network, Robin and Vince Capone, for their support as a sponsor of this event as well. So I want to thank all those who helped to make this event possible, as well as all of you. Many of you, how many of you have been to the Teach-In before? Raise your hand if you've been to the Teach-In over the years. Excellent. So for many of you, the Teach-In may have been, if you're like me, the Teach-In may have been a part of your kind of faith and justice formation over the years, a place you came to find the intersections of these things. And so we're really grateful to have you here again tonight. We hope you'll continue to be part of our work. You know, young alumni, former Jesuit volunteers are a growing part of our work as people start to get engaged individually after they move on from their institution, their college, their university, their volunteer programs. So we're excited to have you be part of this tonight, and we hope you'll continue to be part of it. I want to recognize 3 individuals tonight who will be honored tomorrow during the Teach-In. We began a Young Alumni Award recently, named after our former executive director who passed away very suddenly at the age of 33 about 11 years ago. Her name was Moira Erin O'Donnell. And we created the Moira Erin O'Donnell Emerging Leaders for Justice Award, and we'll be honoring the first 3 individuals. You can see the sign here. The first 3 individuals tomorrow. Sarah Bestie, who is a 2005 graduate of Boston College. Sarah is not with us here this weekend. She is in Liberia, where she's a medical doctor serving there. Danny Swan, who's a Wheeling Jesuit grad, 2009. Is Danny here yet? I know he's on his way, I think. And then Kristen Trudeau. Kristen's here. Kristen's right there. Raise your hand. Stand up, Kristen. Stand up, please. Thank you. Kristen is a 2014 graduate of Loyola Marymount University, a former Jesuit volunteer, and she's also been a blogger for ISN, for which we're very grateful for. But without any further ado, I'd like to turn things over to Father Jim Martin to welcome Father Greg Boyle to our special Q&A event. Father Jim.
Yeah, we'll get that. Thank you very much. Can you hear me in the back? Can you hear this mic? Yes. Why don't we start with a prayer? Let's begin in the name.
At Detroit Mercy is sent this poem, of which part of it says, I live in two countries, one is thirsty, one is on fire, both need water. And I think that's kind of where we are. It's a little bit like an earthquake. At Homeboy, it was sort of quite unsettling, as it was anywhere, because we have a lot of undocumented homies who work at Homeboy Industries, and homies whose family members are undocumented, so a great deal of worry. And all of us have had candidates not win before. That's not a big deal. But so the grieving is kind of a little bit outsized. It's not about the loss of your candidate. It's about grieving for future, really, which that's an odd thing to have happen. And I think that happened. I think that's quite beyond politics, frankly. But Thornton Wilder says that only saints and poets cherish every minute. So I think part of this time is how do you cherish this moment? How do you locate your heart? How do you can find your heart easily at the moment, because I find it sort of breaking. And loss of this magnitude, and I don't think we're overstating it, frankly, loss of this magnitude reminds you what you care about, and that's a good thing. So then you cherish your own broken heart, and then it anchors you where you need to be. The disciples asked Jesus, or implore him really, increase our faith. And we think it's, add to our reading list or tell us more things we ought to believe or something. But the original language really is about to what ought we to give our hearts. And so that's why I think this time is particularly blessed, because it tells us what we care about. And that's for me, it's a good controlling question. To what ought we to give our hearts? So nothing refines that more than wanting all over again to take seriously what Jesus took seriously, which is inclusion and nonviolence and unconditional, compassionate, loving kindness and acceptance. So that's where we want to stand, everyone in this room and everyone at these days together. So I find that kind of heartening, actually, to cherish our broken hearts so that we can remind ourselves what do we care about. So rather than demonizing, which is the tendency, and a thing that certainly we learn at Homeboy Industries is that demonizing is always untruth. So the minute you get near it, you need to get away from it. And so we want not to demonize the folks who voted for him, nor the president-elect himself, and still maintain our ability to announce and denounce and find the thing to which we ought to give our hearts. So I don't know, that's where I am at the moment.
Can you say a little bit more about demonizing as untruth? What does that mean to you?
Well, gang members in LA anyway are, there's my segue, but
artfully
away from the Donald. So, there, at least 30 years ago when I started, they were the most demonized subgrouping of the poor in Los Angeles. So, but as long as you know that there are no exceptions to that, I've never met an exception. And I testify a lot in death penalty cases where as a gang expert, and the prosecution wants me to kind of concede that the defendant who's killed multiple people is in fact evil or a demon or a monster. But as long as you know that that's never the case and that's never true, and that's the thing you can take to the bank. So I'm always wanting to be insistent on that. But we're human beings. We can't help ourselves. We can catch ourselves, but we can't help ourselves. We're always going to demonize. We're going to move in that direction and scapegoat and however that works. As long as we're aware that that's a tendency for us and to make sure that we keep that at bay. That's why it's important to stand with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop. And then you find who they are in your own community, so that somehow inclusion wins the day.
I'm going to stay just for one more question on this topic. A lot of people have told me in the past few days, and I really am curious about your response to this, that they feel hopeless. They feel a sense of despair. And I would imagine at different points in your ministry, you've come in contact with people who are struggling with hopelessness and despair themselves, or you've struggled with that. What do you say to people who feel that there's no more hope and that they are tending or tempted to despair?
I was talking to a volunteer here who works in the L'Arche community, and Jean Vanier, he says that, where are you? You're here somewhere. He talks about tenderness is kind of the highest form of mature spirituality, and I agree with him. And I think only the soul that can ventilate the world with tenderness has any chance of changing the world. And so at Homeboy, we always say that love is the answer, but community is the context, but tenderness is the methodology. So tenderness is how you create the connective tissue that joins us together as members of the human family. So that's where hope is for me. If you can just anchor yourself in tenderness in the immediacy of now with each other, this is the delivery system of hope, I think. It's the only way that people can stay connected to each other, especially in times like this. And I think your question just underscores the fact how different this really is. I mean, you really can't say my candidate lost, because that's not what happened. And that's what people feel. And it's important to name that, to kind of say there's just a sense of inclusion and decency and fairness and kinship to which we are all called that kind of was ripped apart. And And I don't think that's about not acknowledging, people in parts of the country who feel left out, which I think is legitimate. And still, we want to kind of check our own comfort level as a country with the kind of language and rhetoric that we've been enduring for the last nearly 2 years. So, I was reading NCR with great, a cardinal who was quite delighted with this result, because now Christian values will be kind of embraced. And I thought, wow, it would be unrecognizable to Jesus. And then listening on NPR, some representative from evangelical Christians saying, absolutely giddy, that evangelical Christians had voted so overwhelmingly in that direction. So that's a head scratcher, but I'm consoled to know that it's that Jesus is scratching his head at that, and that's some consolation, I think.
You've been
Not much.
Yeah, your work has been so much about bringing people together and building bridges like that, and not demonizing, as you said. For those of us who aren't familiar with your story, can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved first in gang ministry?
Well, I was pastor of a really poor parish, and I'm going to probably say 2 minutes about that later on when I speak. So, and it had a lot of gangs, and I was burying kids, and so we just, as a community, started to respond, started a school, started jobs programs, started eventually social enterprises, and now we're quite large.
And what? Thank God. What do you find the most exciting and consoling part of that ministry?
Well, I'd love traveling with like these two characters. The day won't ever come when I have more courage, or I am more noble, or I'm closer to God than David and Jose and the thousands who walk through there. So once you can kind of, it's easy to move quickly to a place of awe at what folks have to carry rather than judgment at how they've managed their lives. And so it's a humbling experience. I mean, again, Jean Vanier says, he's a student at the University of the Poor, and I feel kind of endlessly a student at the University of Homeboy Industries. And a lot of you, especially Jesuit volunteers here, I know you experienced that, and FJVs who have had that experience of being kind of anchored in a community where you are the student, and you are humbly somehow having your heart reshaped, and that's really unique. Recently I took two homies. I don't know if I told you guys that Reuben and David. They're brand new, in early 20s, and I said, "Come with me. I'm going to give a talk at this fancy hotel in Hollywood." And we brought this woman named Nikki, who's from London, and she's part of our global Homeboy network. So we've helped start programs modeled on Homeboy in 142 programs in the country, and 15 outside the country. So she's our London connection. So she was in the front seat, and these two gang members in the back seat were driving to a hotel. And David, in Spanish, there's an expression, no tiene pelos en la lengua, and so David just has no filter. So he says to her, "Hey, where are you from? You talk funny," to this Nikki. She goes, "London." And he goes, "Oh, that's where you eat snails, isn't it? You eat snails there?" And she goes, "Well, no, I believe that's France." "Oh, I always get those two confused," he said. I said, "Well, they do too." And so we go there, and it's like a really fancy hotel. We go up to the top floor, and there's a swimming pool, an amazing view, and we go to this conference center, which is up there at the top of the hotel, and David goes, "Damn, gee, if I had ever seen this place before, I never would have gotten into my gang," he said. Which was really odd and curious because it's just sort of reimagining something beyond what you knew. And so all during the talk, I would make references to them and point out at them and talk about how that, we're all exactly what God had in mind when God made us. And I pointed at them when I said that. And afterwards, they were like rock stars, all the people at this huge conference, 1,000 people, they all just surrounded them and taking selfies, and they felt really important. Then we were walking to the car, and David and I were walking together. He's a little chaparrito, a little tiny guy, and Nikki, the London lady, and Ruben were way behind us. And so we're waiting at the elevator, and he puts his hand on my shoulder, and he leans his head on my arm, and he said, "You know what I love the most about your talk?" Now, all of you would probably, how would you finish that sentence? You would say, "Oh, it made me laugh, it made me cry," or "I saw myself in it," or "I like that story." No, he said, "You know what I love the most about your talk is that you're not embarrassed by us." And I just had to contain myself. And that's what you want to create, that's what Homeboy wants to be, is a place where folks who feel demonized and sometimes anchored in a shame that's really beyond a human's ability to surpass, to go to a place where they're not embarrassed by you. So, that just happened last week, so I'm fresh. So
No, it's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And it's when you're talking, I'm thinking about God is not embarrassed to be with us as Jesus.
Yeah.
He's not embarrassed, right? So
Ever.
It's beautiful. Thank you. You had mentioned that there are 140 places, roughly.
Yeah, so we have, in 2008, when we moved into our current location, we started to get these requests to kind of airlift Homeboy into Wichita. I remember that was the first one. And then we had to decide as a staff whether we wanted to be the McDonald's of gang intervention programs, with over 5 billion gang members served, So we opted not to do that, and so we said, well, what if we offered what we call technical assistance, or my friend Jim Oswald here has helped us with it, and so we have a thing called The Gathering every August, and we get 300, 400 people from all over the world who have started programs. So we have Braveheart Industries in Glasgow, Scotland, and Rise Up Industries in San Diego, and Youth Empowerment in Miami, and all these different programs that are kind of modeled, shaped. We don't let them use our logo or say our name except to say that they're a partner in the global Homeboy network. So it's a way of connecting. So we gather every August, and it's best practices and all that kind of stuff. So it's. But we thought it was more respectful rather than airlift Homeboy into some place where Wichita would say, well, what do you know about Wichita? And they'd be right, So we'd like them to come to us and hang out, and then we go to them and hang out, and then together, you come up with something that makes sense. So in Guatemala City, our partner there, tattoo removal makes a lot of sense, but it doesn't make any sense in Glasgow, So you pick and choose, and they go, this will work. It's mainly the reentry community. If it's not gang, it's disaffected youth, it's immigrant youth, that's a big one in parts of the world, and in Sydney and Canada, that kind of thing.
Are gangs, at least in the United States, on the rise or on the wane? What would you say?
I don't know. I mean, LA is a hard place to. 1992, we had 1,000 gang-related homicides in LA County, so that's been cut in half, and then in half again. But then you go to Chicago. Anybody here from Chicago? Yeah. So, and that's a hard place at the moment, and hard to wrap your mind around it because it's difficult because people want to kind of hit the nail on the head, but gang violence is always about something else. It's a language. It's telling you something. You want to understand what language it's speaking. It's about a lethal absence of hope. So address the despair and you're going to do something significant, and heal the trauma, which is so huge. Because if folks can't find their way clear to transform their pain, they're just going to keep transmitting it. So, but you're always trying to do it the other way around, to address it head on, silence the bullets rather than understand, what does this mean?
Do you, you had mentioned tenderness. Do you, have you found Pope Francis's papacy helpful to yourself personally or your ministry? How has that changed things for you, the Year of Mercy as well?
Yeah, I just find it so amazing. I reading in the New Yorker, I don't know if you read this, it's about the Southern Baptists or something, and talking about how hostile secular culture is to Christianity. And I thought, yeah, not so fast. It's hostile to a certain kind of Christianity, So I was reading a Q&A with Whoopi Goldberg, who may well represent secular culture. And so they ask her, what is your most, the living person you most admire? And she could have said Barack Obama or Dalai Lama, but she said Pope Francis. And then she added, yeah, he's going with the original program. And I love that. So when I read this thing in the New Yorker about secular culture is hostile, no, it absolutely wants to embrace the original program. Absolutely wants to take seriously what Jesus took seriously. It doesn't have any time for, frankly, your brand of Christianity that wants to do the opposite of what Jesus hoped to do, to exclude, be tiny, be pure. It has no interest in that. And yet when you watch, you can encounter in the culture, people are going, no, we long for this. We long for kinship. We long for connection to each other. We long for the circle widening so nobody's outside the circle. That's what people long for. But it was kind of a switch went off for me, because I went, no, there is no hostility at all. It's hostile to what it ought to be hostile to, which is fake and false. And this is why Pope Francis, when he talks about the joy of the gospel, it's not the thrill of Catholic values. No, it's the joy of the gospel. That's a whole other thing. And please tell me that trumps everything else. Sorry for using that verb. I hate that now.
Well, and he's authentic too.
Yeah, he's the real deal. That's the original program. You can roll up your sleeves to that and say, yeah, no, I'm down with the original program. And the more you can return to that, it's all a return. That's what mercy's about. It's about somehow, choosing to be in the world who God is. Compassionate, loving, kind, tender, with a no matter whatness on the side. That's what it is. And you're not going to encounter anybody except somebody who's terrified, who doesn't want to embrace that.
Well, it's also amazing to me that the things he does that shock people are things that should have been done years ago. So, oh my gosh, he lives so simply, right? Oh my gosh, he went into a prison and he actually met prisoners and he shook their hands. And it's kind of, to me, it's exciting and it's also depressing that these things that should be par for the course are shocking to people. But, I think you're right. He's going back to the original program. Can you, we have a lot of people here who are working in social justice, who are advocating for the poor. What do you find the most helpful in your own spiritual practice to help you with your social justice work? Is there something you would sort of give advice to people about their own practice in that way? Yeah,
I think sometimes we can, what burns us out is the difference between taking the right stand on issues and standing in the right place. What will keep you alive is standing in the right place. So, as a great teacher of Ignatian ways, in like the two standards. It has, see Jesus standing in the lowly place. For me, it's a powerful image. It's not, Jesus isn't saying, get your ass over in the lowly place. It's, I wish really you could find your way to the lowly place. Or, no, all it is you're watching, you're observing Jesus standing in the lowly place. And then you go, wow, I want to stand there with him. And then there's something about standing there that suddenly is very, obviously life-giving and changing. And for me, it's the difference between saving the world or savoring the world. And I would encourage you to savor the world more than save it. Because I think saving lives is for the Coast Guard. I'm kind of not interested, and that's kind of what I learned 6 years into doing this work, where you just kind of say, no, I'm going to do what I can, I'm going to stand in the right place, I'm going to love with as much tenderness as I can, and I'm going to allow my heart to be altered by people. And a PBS interviewer ended his interview with me once saying, how's it feel to have saved thousands and thousands of lives? And this isn't some kind of false thing. I don't know what he's talking about, because the experience that all of you in this room have had is of having your life changed by standing in the right place. And that's what you need to do. Because once it becomes about you, once it becomes about, turning the light switch on for somebody rather than holding the flashlight on the light switch, you all own a flashlight, you all know where to point it in a darkened room, so somebody else will get to that light switch, but you can't turn that switch on for people. But it's enough that you happen to possess the flashlight. It's enough that you can stand in the lowly place. That's the only way that the margins get erased, it seems to me, is by standing at them.
It's also very freeing because you don't have to do everything. My spiritual director likes to say there's good news and there's better news. This is Damien O'Connell. The good news is that there is a Messiah. The better news is it's not you.
Yeah.
Right? And you can and in that way you can allow God, I think, to work more freely through you because you're not worried about having to do everything for everybody or be everything for everybody. And I find that very freeing.
Yeah, part of I was in Houston recently, and some really earnest, good guy, what we would call a hardcore gang outreach worker. So he's former gang member, former felon, on the streets, and pleading with me. And he says, how do you reach them? And I said, well, for starters, stop trying to reach them. Can you be reached by them? For me, it's the only question. And suddenly, if you do that, everything gets turned on its head. It's about receiving. I was privileged when you were at Weston. Mm-hmm. So at Weston, when I was there, for one brief semester, Henry Nouwen was there. Wow. And Henry Nouwen and Parker Palmer team taught a course that I took. It was unbelievable. But it was a course on ministry. And Henry Nouwen was not having a good time in his life. That's when he left. He hated Harvard and he went to L'Arche, I think, pretty much right after that. And so, but I remember a student in the class said, what is ministry? And he just kind of threw up his hands and he goes, can you receive people? That's all he said. Wow. And I thought, yeah, that's it. That's the kind of thing about allow yourself to be reached. Can you receive people? And for me, again, that was one of those light switches, where I went, oh, okay. Then it's freeing. Yeah. And the thing at Homeboy, we talk about ennobilizing, that if you can allow yourself to be reached, if you can just value whoever's in front of you, if you can be tenacious in your own tenderness, then people inhabit the truth of who they are. And then they become that truth. And it's mutually ennobilizing. People, they inhabit their own nobility. They end up, discovering their own sovereignty as people. And you haven't done anything except to receive who they are. I mean, people don't know that they're valuable unless somebody is receiving their value. And so that makes more sense to me. But it also keeps, otherwise you burn out trying to fight the good cause rather than allow yourself to savor folks.
Thank you. We have plenty of time. Well, we have some time for... I'm very excited. I'm sure Greg's very excited to hear your questions. So questions, and you can just shout them out. I'm sure we can hear you from where you are. Any questions for Greg? There must be. Yes.
So what I understood about your light switch, flashlight analogy is that we aren't there to turn on the light switch, but just to have the flashlight.
It comes from a story from a book I wrote. About, real quickly, a guy named Lulu who was selling crack and pretty soon became his own best customer, and I said, you really need to go to rehab. Finally, he agreed. I drove him to this mountaintop. 30 days later, his younger brother, Eric, did something that gang members don't do, which is he put a gun to his head and killed himself, and gang members don't do that. So I called Lulu and I said, I'm going to come told him about his brother, and he was devastated. I said, I'm going to pick you up for the funeral, but I'm going to drive you back. And he says, I want to come back because I like how recovery feels. So I picked him up and he got in the car and he told me this dream he had the night before, and we were a room like this, pitch black, no illuminated exit signs, no lights at all. And he knows I'm in the room, but we're not speaking. And suddenly in the dream, I have a flashlight and I pull it out and I aim it at the light switch, and I don't move and I don't speak. And he says he knows he's the only one who can turn the light switch on. And with great trepidation, really, he walks following the beam of light, and then he gets to the light switch and he takes a deep breath. He's sobbing now as he's telling this story. And the light is flooded with, the room is flooded with light. And he says with this voice of remarkable discovery, you know, the light is better than the darkness. Like he didn't know this to be the case. Well, for me, probably that was my 6 years into doing this work, where I never slept, on my bike in the middle of the night, put that Uzi down, are you sure you want to shoot that guy? And then in an instant I realized, no, that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm not supposed to turn the light switch on for people. That's crazy making. That's exactly what we ought not to be doing. To say nothing of the fact that it leads directly to burnout.
No, I'm a desperate volunteer, and sometimes I feel like I only have one light or one flashlight, but there's multiple. How do I decide?
You need more people in the room. Yeah, seriously. That's what I think. And you can only do what you can do, you know. Isn't it John the 23rd who said, but what is it?
So John the 23rd was...
at night?
At night he would be upset and worried about the church, and he'd wake up in a panic, and he'd say to himself, Giovanni, he'd say, he would. He'd say, who's... Of course he'd say this in Italian. He wouldn't say it with an English accent. He'd say, Giovanni, who's in charge of the church? You or the Holy Spirit? The Holy Spirit. So go back to sleep, Giovanni. Other questions?
I knew you'd know that.
I would know that one. Yes.
When it comes to those of us who are educators, who work with high schoolers, middle schoolers, youth ministers, teachers, what is the message that we, at this point in the world, should be sending to high schoolers, youth who are growing up in this world and don't know what to do about it? What can we as educators tell them?
Yeah, I don't know what to tell people. I'm not big on advice, you know. Again, love is the answer, and it's funny. We went to the White House today, and so they had a circle of people out in front, and they were just in a circle. And is that what the sign said? Love is the answer, or love is all you need, or something? And And yeah, it's simple, but again, it's like you don't love to stay somewhere in the air or in the ether or in your heart or even in your head. Unless it becomes tenderness, it's not connecting. And that comes from being attentive to people. And I think tiny tenderness and kindness, and I just think that's the answer. And I think the more you can ventilate the world with that kind of thing, and that's what you teach them to do. Otherwise, it becomes too global. It's like, I don't know what the hell to do about our current situation. All I know is that you need to be tender with the person right in front of you. And, and that has to kind of be enough for us for the moment, And you get enough people kind of feeling safe in that, and being on the receiving end of your tenderness, then suddenly that becomes, you can watch it actually become something powerful. But otherwise, it's just wanting to take the right stand on issues and without kind of wanting to stand in the right place, and confident in that,
Questions for Greg? Come on. Here we go.
My question is regarding the other. So oftentimes in Jesuit Catholic education, we encourage people to go to the other and minister to them, whether it be ministers, social workers, teachers. What about people who are in our school system and feel as though they themselves are the other? How do we go to them, and how do we mitigate that feeling from the people that are in our schools, in our parishes currently?
Well, I think that step one is to recognize that that's an issue, and that, and it's not about going to or even men and women for others, I think it's with, and with, so the more that you can sort of find it as companionship and connection, and rather than I'm going to do for you. But a lot of that just has to be, it's a way of seeing, how do you recognize the person who's feeling themselves otherized in your community? And that's just comes from being attentive, otherwise we miss it. And I'm sure we miss it all the time in our institutions and any place we work. I'm sure we miss it at Homeboy Industries, where people, it's important to just kind of catch people and ask people and but that's a decision, a decision to be attentive is kind of a daily thing,
Questions? Yes.
When you spoke about demonization, I'm just wondering, in terms of the election, what do we do when it's our church that's the one doing the demonizing against different communities? And how do we act as witnesses in faith to sort of challenge the church so they know we love them? The communities that being discriminated and hated by the bishops.
Jim? That seemed kind of, directed at either one of us.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, well, I would say a couple of things. First of all, I always tell people, you're the church too. And you have every much a right, I love this phrase, learned in theology at Weston, by virtue of your baptism, for speaking out as I do, Greg does, your parish priest does, your local bishop does, the Pope does, right? So to really own that. To say, Jesus Christ has called me into the church at my baptism for a particular reason. Greg was talking about value before, that you value, and that God has called you into this time, for a particular reason to speak up. So that's the first thing, right? So to remember that your voice is important, and you have a right. Lumen Gentium in the Second Vatican Council said the lay people have a right and are sometimes duty bound to speak out on matters for the good of the church. Duty, you have an obligation to speak out on that thing. That's the first thing. Second thing I think is to do it in charity, right? Very difficult when someone is demonizing you, to treat them with charity. But this is what Jesus does, right? I mean, from the cross, which is a pretty high standard. I was thinking the other day that Jesus, from the cross, not only forgives his executioners, but he prays for them. Father, forgive them is a prayer, right? So to do it with as much charity as you can, and knowing that it's hard, that's really difficult. And the third thing I think is to sort of, have hope, as Greg was saying, and have a sense even of patience, right? Have hope in the resurrection that, even if you don't see this stuff happening, for whatever community that you're talking about, if it's minorities or LGBT people or women in the church, anyone, that Christ is with you and that there's always this hope. I always think of the disciples on Good Friday and Holy Saturday. They are stuck behind those doors. They are fearful. They think nothing good is going to come out, and boom, the resurrection. And so to have that kind of hope. But I really firmly believe, particularly, most of the people in this room are lay people, by virtue of your baptism, you are in this church. And the other thing is, never let anyone say you don't belong in the church, you're a bad Catholic, Someone tweeted this to me this morning and said, you are not a Catholic. Something like that. And I wrote back, I couldn't resist. I normally don't, as they say, normally you don't feed the trolls, basically. But I tweeted back and I wrote, I said, actually I am. You can go to the Church of St. Madeleine Sophie in Philadelphia and look at my baptismal record. Sorry. So that's part of it too. So yeah, but what do you think about the church?
I also think that, there's the demonizing kind of mode is also, it's all about terror. And so that's a great example of Jesus walking into that room and the doors are bolted and the drapes are drawn. And Jesus enters in and he pulls open the drapes, opens the windows, this is in my imagining, and, he unbolts the door and he says, let's go. And fresh air, light, who knows what's going to await us out there. They all talk shit about Thomas because he's not there, but I want to go, yeah, well, he's not there, he's out there. And I always liked that about him, But instead, sometimes, unfortunately, I think we have a church that enters that room and then co-signs on the terror. You have every reason to be terrified. Do you have any more bolts we can put on the door? And that's just fear. That's not demonizing them. That's just saying, oh, it's about fear. We're terrified to imagine this other kind of church sometimes. So the more that we can call each other to fearlessness, and I have a friend who always prays this mantra. He says, be fearless for me. And I use it a lot. And it's helpful because it puts first things recognizably first. If you know that this is really about people who are frightened rather than people who are ogres.
Well, and you see what happens with fear. Paul says, perfect love casts out fear, and I think perfect fear casts out love too. It just drives it out. And so to bring that back. Other questions for Greg? Yes.
How do you balance tenderness with high expectations for your homies? Like each in Baltimore City, and I'll have a kid come in and say, I'm not going to do the test today. And I say, why? He says, well, my brother is dead. So I say, okay, no problem. So if I keep doing that, then eventually, that's fear gets kind of left behind and turns into a victim, and then my high expectations aren't there, and then he hasn't learned anything. So how do you balance tough love with tenderness in your practice?
Yeah, there's no balance. I have no balance whatsoever. Sorry. I'm sorry. Because part of the thing is, the countercultural thing here is really kind of anti-meritocracy as far as I'm concerned. I think God has one question for us all the time, which is, what is all this measuring about? I think God doesn't do it at all, ever. So at Homeboy, we try to be allergic to holding the bar up and asking homies to measure up. You show up, you hold the mirror up, you tell people the truth, you love them like crazy with a no matter whatness. And that works. But it also is the good and right and true thing to do, it seems to me. And I think we ought not to be frightened of, what it is that, a lot of it has to do with how comfortable we are with our own essential wound. Because if you don't welcome and love your own wound, then you're going to despise the wounded. And it's a very subtle thing in terms of holding the bar up and asking folks to measure up. I had a meeting with homies and the senior people, gang members, but they run the place, and they were talking about a trainee who was kind of coloring outside the lines, like that kid, And one guy said, what his problem is? He thinks his shit don't stink. And then the other guy said, no, all he smells is stink. And it was the difference between someone who was a friend with his own wound and somebody who was a stranger to his own brokenness. And that is just absolutely key. Otherwise, we get into this measure up, you're not enough. And who in this room thinks that that is ever on God's agenda? That my love for God, God's love for me is zero dependent on my love for God. That it's absolutely total. I don't have to measure up to anything. I don't even have to show up for anything. There's not a thing I can do that will alter that, and that's kind of liberating. But it's hard for us to do that, obviously, because we want people to meet our expectations. And yet what God is hoping we'll do is love them like crazy no matter what. Good, bad, doesn't make any difference. Nothing will alter this course for me. And watch what happens when that happens. The good news is that has more impact than asking them to measure up to this bar we've set, I think.
Thank you.
Are we out of time?
I think we have time for one more question. Come on.
All right.
There we go. There we go. Question.
I'm 62 and I have no idea why you just asked that question. I'm not ashamed of it.
Greg, can we ask you to pray for us and close us with a prayer?
Okay. Loving, compassionate, and always tender God, we ask that you quicken us to your service so that we might choose to be in the world who you are, that you might fill our hearts with the desire to communicate only one thing, and that is your tenderness. Help us to be freed from all the things that rob us of you, and keep us mindful of those in the lowly place where you have invited us to stand. And we make this prayer always with the same and great confidence through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
Amen.
Join me in thanking the great Greg Boyle.